Hello, good evening, everybody. This is Eric Ranchard. I can see that there's already quite some attendees. So we have at this moment about 43 participants and they're still coming in. So welcome. And yes, we also have a very nice guest today. It's Hugh Harvey. And Hugh, I think most of you will have heard his name or know him. But Hugh Harvey is a radiologist. He's trained in the NHS and at the Europe's leading cancer research institute, the Institute of Cancer Research. He was awarded there as Science Writer of the Year, and previously was also consultant radiologist at Guy's and St. Thomas. He had several senior positions at two leading AI startups. But he's also sat on several national committees for AI in radiology in the UK, and he acted as a co-chair of the Government Commission Topol Review that examined the impact of AI in the NHS. Currently, he's managing director at the digital health consultancy Harvey Health, which is focused on clinical, regulatory, and financial services for the technology sector. So today, Hugh is going to give us an overview of the AI startup landscape in Europe or the European Union, and he's going to talk about the key trends and challenges for the future. So welcome, Hugh. Maybe a few words to be said by Daniel, who will be guiding you in the discussion afterwards. Maybe Daniel, you can say a few practical things.
Yeah, I just wrote in the chat. So
I don't think
please
so.
feel free.
Oh yeah.
Please feel free to ask your questions either in the chat box or in the Q&A section, and we will take care to discuss at the end, or maybe they will point in the middle of the presentation, but mostly towards the end. And yeah, I'm happy to hear what you has to tell us. Please.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction. I hope you can all hear me and hopefully see my screen.
Yes.
Everything's okay.
Everything's okay. And hopefully you can see my red dot moving around.
Yes.
Good. Well, thank you very much for having me on. Eric invited me to speak on the AI sector in the EU with a focus on the startup landscape. I'm sure any of you who've been to any radiology conference over the past 3 or 4 years will have noticed a slow but sure increase in booths representing AI companies who are promising all sorts of things to add into your workflow and help you do your jobs. Originally, people were saying this stuff is going to replace radiologists, but I think we've all realized now that it's nowhere near that. Though it is potentially going to be very powerful in augmenting and improving not only our workflow, but our diagnostic accuracy and our communications with our other clinical colleagues. So today is going to be an overview of the whole landscape across Europe, and it's going to be focusing on what the key trends are and some of the challenges for the future. I'm going to touch a little bit on regulation and have a look at one of the big surveys conducted on behalf of the ESR on radiologist attitudes to AI and how that fits in with what's happening in the market space. So to start with, here's a map of Europe, and I had to actually re-educate myself on who's in Europe and who's not anymore, because it's all getting very complicated, but this is a rough guide. So I'm focusing on all the countries in green, purple and grey here, but obviously my own country hasn't quite decided what we want to do yet. But for the purposes of this talk, I'm still including the UK because there are quite a few startups here. In general, if you go on Google Analytics for the EU and you type in search trends for artificial intelligence and for radiology, something interesting happens. You can see that obviously both have increased, which is a good thing, but they also almost completely match each other, especially in more recent times, which kind of suggests that people who are Googling for AI and trying to find out more about it are increasingly aware that AI is poised to help radiologists in the practice of radiology. And so I think AI has not only raised awareness of our profession. I think 10 years ago, if you asked a patient, what does a radiologist do? They wouldn't have a clue. people might now at least have an understanding that we exist as a clinical speciality, at least thanks in part to the rise in interest of artificial intelligence. I only started research from 2015, and that's roughly when deep learning really sort of hit the mainstream. So I haven't included since before then. So before we look at AI in radiology in Europe, I thought it might be interesting to have a look and see what AI is poised to be doing in other sectors. So this was a report produced by a venture capital firm called MMC Ventures, and they looked at AI startups in all sectors across Europe. And here you can see on the left that they found that the UK is leading in sort of AI marketing startups. So these are startups which automate your sales and advertising processes to customers. But France is the European hub for customer service startups. So companies who are using AI to automate parts of software as service or customer service programs. You can also see that Germany and Spain are also nicely highlighted. So I thought it would be interesting in this talk to see if the AI radiology market sort of mirrors this Western European predominance. So I have been searching through, well, 3 sources really to look for AI companies in Europe. The first is companies who've presented at RSNA over the past 2 or 3 years, companies who have presented at the ECR Congress over the past 2 or 3 years. And then I asked Twitter, and in fact, the most fruitful search was all of those people on Twitter who've been interacting over the past couple of days to tell me about companies I'd never heard of. So thank you to everybody who helped and took part in that. And that has helped me produce this map. I think this is the first map of the AI radiology landscape across Europe. I haven't been able to find another one. And apologies if you work for a company I haven't found or has been mentioned to me. I found 44, predominantly, as you can see, across Western Europe. None in Iceland or Norway or Eastern Europe, and surprisingly none in Italy. Maybe they're all too busy with coronavirus to start their startups. But you can see that really it does match what MMC Ventures found in their AI market sector analysis for other sectors, that it is England, France, Germany, Spain, which are kind of leading the way. Interestingly, you'll notice here in Belgium and the Netherlands, you have a nice little cluster and concentration as well. And I think this really speaks to the academic excellence of the Netherlands and their sort of entrepreneurial spirit there. And I'm quite impressed actually for such a small nation to have such a big impact on this sector. Germany and France are doing about equally well. And England has certainly got a healthy amount of startups. I think this is in part to the fact that we are the only European country to have an entirely nationalized healthcare system. So access to data, even though it's tricky for people outside of the UK, access to data for UK startups who get grant funding has actually been fairly solid over the past few years. So I'm going to come back to this map later. I know many of you will be taking screenshots. Don't worry, I will be sharing this online so you can have a high fidelity version available afterwards. So what are these AI startups focusing on doing? So this is an infographic I actually produced about 3 years ago now in a blog called Why AI Won't Replace Radiologists. And to explain why it won't, I broke down what we as radiologists do in our day-to-day jobs into 8 different categories, from the patient record all the way through to communication of reports and actioning the results. And then underneath in the dotted lines, these are areas I predicted that AI could potentially help the radiologist in certain areas. So to take an example, we could have an AI system which takes in a patient request and helps formulate what imaging modality is the best to use, or if imaging is indeed required. Most countries have what's known as best use criteria for certain given clinical presentations. I know that we certainly do in the UK. The second thing is automated scheduling and appointment booking, trying to make sure that the throughput and the flow through the imaging department is managed as best as possible. And again, automated systems seem, to me at least, to be highly appropriate to help with those. Then you have image acquisition. So these are AI systems which are designed to automate acquisition in certain parts. So an example might be when a patient is lying on the gantry of a CT scanner, the AI can automatically plan and slice out where it's going to be scanning. Same with MRI and planning the volumes. Dose reduction, we've certainly seen some interest in both CT and PET dose reduction. And for MRI, we want to see scan time reduction as well. I think Facebook have an interesting project on reducing MRI scan time, and there are certainly a couple of companies outside of Europe who have FDA-cleared products which purportedly help with fast MRI acquisition. I didn't find any in Europe, though. Then there's the processing part. So the image is taken, but as radiologists, we don't look at the raw imaging data. There has to be some kind of post-processing. And during that process, AI could help with pulling out segmentations, contouring things for radiotherapy practice, image enhancing or standardizing imaging quality, doing quality assurance, and things like that. And then the main thing, the sexy part of AI, as I like to call it, is the perception part. And this is where the radiologist comes in. You'll note the radiologist hasn't had too much to do with this first 4 phases, even though they are part of the radiology workflow. The radiologist is sort of more in charge of these 4. But perception is definitely the one that has caught the attention. And for sure, this is the aspect that most startups are focusing on. So these are perceptive tasks. So these are not trying to make a reasoned judgment. That comes next. These are things of segmenting the imaging out, detecting things in an image, quantifying, providing analytics in an image. And this is the vast majority of what the AI startups are offering. And then we move on to reasoning. And this may be the reason why AI, most of all, is not going to replace radiologists. There are no clinical AI reasoning systems that I'm aware of that can match diagnostic inference and decision-making capabilities of a human, given that we can absorb multiple inputs of data, both visual and textual and contextual, and come up with a common sense, bespoke decision per patient. AI systems tend not to be so good at that. I think over the next decade, we'll see a rise of Bayesian analytics trying to focus on this, but for now, deep learning is much more suitable to the computer vision tasks in the perception area. So once we've looked at an image and reasoned about it, we have to write a report, and obviously documentation and synoptic or structured reporting. This is a thing, the concept has been around for decades. Radiologists have really been sort of repulsed by structured reporting for very long, but I think now there are some interesting tools out there that can enable us to standardize our reports and codify them at source rather than just doing our verbose free text reports that we do at the moment. And then the last thing is communication. How do you get that report to the right person at the right time and ensure that the actions were taken necessarily? We know that a lot of reports that we give aren't read by our referring colleagues, or that they don't action every single bit that we say. And then there's a whole part of patient information. Patients have limited access to their reports, and when they do get access, they don't understand a word we're saying because we like to use very complicated sort of radiological terminology that no patients just literally don't understand. In fact, some of our doctor colleagues don't even understand. So how do we translate what we're saying in a radiologist language to a sort of patient-facing information side? So these are all areas that I think that AI could and can help with. So let's have a look and see. So I broke down the 44 startups that I found across Europe into these tasks. So I've assigned orange to the processing phase, which is a few startups. The vast majority are green in this perceptive phase, by which brain MR and neuro quantitative analytics is by far the biggest offering. Reasoning, there's only one company sort of helping with diagnostic reasoning, and there's only one European company helping with structured reporting, which leaves a massive gap for obviously the radiologist to control and still be in charge of this sort of tail end of the workflow. But it means that these gray areas are a big market gap. So I haven't found any startups on actioning these 4 areas. So patient record scheduling, acquisition, and communication. That said, on acquisition, this is probably going to be the remit of the big OEM vendors. They are, after all, the people who sell us the machines. And I know, for instance, that all of the big players, GE, Siemens, Philips, etc., are all automating or trying to put dose reduction or scan time reduction into their hardware scanners. So maybe this is not the remit for startups. Patient record and scheduling, again, are a hard thing for startups to tackle because that data is so locked up in proprietary RIS and EHR systems. And for communication, again, this relies very much on having good quality reports. And until we move fully to a structured reporting system, it's quite hard to pull out relevant information. Natural language processing is fairly good, but in terms of actioning and results communication, I think if you had a structured reporting system, it'd be much easier to provide patient-facing communication and clinical-facing actioning. So that's about the lay of the land in terms of the startup offerings, and I'm going to sort of dive into several of these. It's also worth mentioning here that there are obviously the app stores. These are organizations or startups that are offering a range of all of these use cases in one sort of offering where you can plug and play essentially different applications into your workflow. And I'm going to mention the 3 across Europe that I'm aware of. So before we go sort of individually into some of these offerings, I thought it's also worth mentioning this excellent survey, which was done on behalf of the European Society of Radiology, called the EuroAIM or AIM survey, where they sent out a survey to all the members of the ESR, and about 600 or so responded, and they asked several sort of questions on the perceived impact of artificial intelligence by radiologists. And these were the areas that AI was most likely expected to impact. So breast imaging, so that's mostly screening, mammography, oncology, thoracic, whether that's chest X-ray or chest CT, and neuroimaging. And these are the modalities that they thought were going to be most impacted: mammo, again, CT, and MR. So interestingly, things like ultrasound and PET weren't mentioned. And interestingly, here you don't have things like plain film fractures or ultrasound being mentioned either. And I'm going to compare the results of this survey and see if they were correct and see if this is what the startups are indeed offering. Again, from that paper, the EuroAIM survey, this is where the preferred applications by radiologists. You can see by far, radiologists prefer AI to be able to detect things in asymptomatic subjects, i.e. screening. So I presume they're talking about breast screening, lung screening, perhaps prostate MR screening if that becomes a thing. But also, I guess, if we have routine CTs and MRs coming in, can we automate the kind of the screening on our entire patient body? Can we find osteoporotic vertebral fractures, for instance, in all of our patients more regularly? The second most desired application is staging and restaging in oncology. And again, that's a perceptive task. That's the green dot. Interestingly, I've not found a single European startup who purports to be offering AI-driven staging and restaging in oncology. I know there are some products being built, but I've not found any that are commercially available yet. The third is quantitative measure of imaging biomarkers. This, in the startup world, translates essentially to the neuroimaging quantifying biomarkers and some of the chest CT biomarkers, such as quantifying emphysema and pleural fibrosis and things like that. Some are doing on CT, they're trying to quantifying bone density and things like that. Then they moved into the more esoteric and non-perceptive tasks. So image post-processing was 35% of the respondents. And interestingly, support to structured reporting. Now, if you'd asked radiologists about structured reporting a decade ago, I would imagine this would have been much further down the list. But it looks like the appetite for structured reporting is increasing, with almost 30% of radiologists wanting to see structured reporting being supported by AI. I found it interesting that actually that was above lesion characterization and diagnosis in symptomatic subjects. I would have thought that would have been on parallel with the oncology, but there we go. That was about another third of respondents. Then, of course, detection of incidental findings, providing that safety net underneath the radiologist as we try and report every single incidental finding on every single scan. These aren't high value areas, particularly because by their nature they are incidental, but they're certainly something that can help complete our report. Then image protocol optimization, again, it's another post-processing issue that could be applied by AI. And the last one is prognosis. Now, not many radiologists think that AI can be applied to prognosis. And I guess this comes under the inference and decision-making part of what the radiologist does. So I've not found any startups that are doing prognosis. So that's in keeping with this AIM survey. So I would say largely this survey correlates with what the AI startups are offering across Europe, apart from radiologists want help with staging and restaging in oncology, and not many startups, in fact none, are offering that commercially yet. So that's probably the biggest gap in the market in terms of what the market fit might be. But of course, this is incredibly difficult. Cancer can present in many varied ways across the entire body. And I think the biggest issue, and I'm going to mention this later again, is that no one is in AI is focusing on the bowel. The bowel is incredibly difficult to ground truth and label. I've not seen a single AI startup focus on and trying to find lesions within the bowel, especially on CT and MR. And of course, you cannot stage and restage in oncology without including the bowel on the vast majority of cases. So this may be the downfall for this use case. So I'll pause here, and I think we have a few questions coming in. Is that correct? Just to ask questions before I go into some of the use cases.
So there was just one so one attendee mentioning that there's Mint Medical in Germany. They do oncology and measuring and everything, but as far as I know, they are not really using much AI there.
Yeah.
So that's what Eric also said, and I totally agree that, I mean, abdomen is probably a horror for AI. So yeah, but no, otherwise I think there are no questions at that point, so we may skip them to the end. Yeah,
that's fine. Yeah, so Mint Medical, as far as I know, aren't using deep learning. They may be using some other form of segmentation or support, and it's radiologist driven to annotate and measure things. That's as far as I'm aware. Apologies to Mint Medical if I've got that wrong, but that's why I haven't included them on this map. So let's go on. So just so for utility, what I've done is I've defined these use cases into some sort of utility or utilitarian categorizations. So these aren't clinical use cases. These are things that can help the workflow in 6 certain areas. So can an AI system help standardized reporting? I don't mean structured reporting per se. I mean, can the AI help in the way that we're reporting in a standardized fashion? So you'll see this little microphone reporting logo on the next few slides. Does the AI help with timely communications between either the referrer and the radiologist, or back again? Does it provide quantitative analytics? You'll see this little chip logo. Is it user-friendly and efficient? Does it save time? And can it be helped with quality control and or audit? So you'll see these logos at the top left of the next few slides. So I'll just pause here just so you can have an idea of what these 6 things mean. Standardized reporting, timely communications, quantitative analytics, user-friendly and efficient, time saving, and quality control and audit. So the first use case is image processing. Found 3 companies, Context Vision, IM Fusion, and M Vision. And these do a combination of things. They have some overlapping use cases and some things that set them apart from each other. But the majority do post-processing of acquired medical imaging for a variety of clinical and research tasks. So the number one thing might be 3D visualizations. Now, this isn't necessarily AI, but the AI can be used to pull out certain features and do quantitative analytics on these. Radiotherapy contouring is obviously a big use case for speeding up that process, and AI can do that in a post-processed point of view. And then whoever is in charge of actually doing your contouring in your radiotherapy department can agree or disagree with the contours as they come out of the system. And here's another interesting offering you can see on the left. Image quality can be improved by AI. So this is post-processing imaging quality. This can be done on X-ray, ultrasound, mammography, even MRI, to improve or standardize that quality of that image. And then some newer products are on image annotation, so automating image annotation to say, you know, this is such and such vessel. So if you're doing a chest CT, you can hover your mouse over a certain vessel and go, this is the left pulmonary vein or something. So that's quite a useful tool as well. And image reconstruction again. So this might be things like for orthopedic planning, can you reconstruct the bones, the bone fractures for the orthopods to be able to plan out their surgery. So all of these tools will save time, they're meant to be user-friendly, efficient, and can be used for quality control and audit purposes. So there were 3 startups in the EU focusing on this. And it's interesting to see, actually, I think that there is actually a lot more space in the market for companies that do this, but they have to compete with the OEM vendors, the big players, who will also presumably be providing these. I know that GE and Siemens are working very much on their visualization things, and the other hardware vendors will want to ensure that they standardize their outputs and their post-process image quality as well. So what is the route to market for these kind of startups? It's difficult to sell directly to a hospital, I would imagine. So I think they would have to be partnering with the OEM vendors ultimately, or maybe looking to be acquired by them and have their software either white labeled through them or be acquired totally and subsumed and be part of their product portfolio. So moving on, chest CT, 4 companies across Europe focusing on this. The majority are focusing on lung nodule detection, which is good news for them because the Nelson trial just demonstrated there was an all-cause mortality benefit by using low-dose lung CT screening for lung nodules in at-risk patients, so of a certain age or smoking histories. A couple of these companies on their websites, they state that they're in ongoing prospective studies with results expected this year. That would be brilliant to see. In general, there have been very few prospective studies of computer vision algorithms in radiology. In fact, I'm not aware of any worldwide yet, so presumably these studies will be some of the first when they're out there. We don't just have to focus on lung nodules. We can also offer quantification of lung volumes, emphysema and fibrosis and things like that. And what's interesting is you can provide this standardized reports. And now, if you had a system such as this plugged into your hospital, this is excellent for ongoing research and also post-market validation of your AI algorithms, because you've got all of this quantified data which fits into a standardized report. And again, these are all designed to be user-friendly, provide quantitative analytics, and save significant time. If a radiologist was asked to do this for every single lung nodule, we'd all shoot ourselves in the heads because this is really boring stuff. So saving us a lot of time for doing this kind of quantitative work, I think is a nice niche. Now, agents are working it up in Scotland on the clinical trial. Optelum are based in Oxford, and Radiology are out, I think, in Scandinavia. So there's some broader competition across Europe for this space. But an interesting one to watch, and those chest radiologists, I'm sure, will be eyeing up one of these 3 competitors to have a look at their lung nodule offerings. The next one is chest X-ray. Now, I'm sort of lukewarm on chest X-ray. Most radiologists know that, yes, chest X-ray is by far the highest volume imaging modality, but it's the hardest one to interpret. I would say it's very difficult to ground truth at a chest X-ray. It's not really a diagnostic study if you think about it. The aim of doing a chest X-ray is very rarely to provide a definitive diagnosis. There's most often a follow-on test of some kind to confirm or deny what a radiologist thinks they can see on a chest X-ray. A chest X-ray really is, should I do another test? Should I be worried about a patient? And therefore, most of the startups are working on normal, abnormal, or emergent flagging of chest X-rays rather than individual diagnostics. The caveat here is, though, if you are saying that we can do normal, abnormal, by implication, you are kind of implying that you can diagnose all abnormalities, which we know isn't the case yet. I think I've seen one of these companies saying they can do 75 different findings on chest x-rays, which is, you know, an impressive amount of findings. But there is almost an unlimited amount of things to be seen on a chest x-ray, especially when you consider lines and vessels and congenital abnormalities and slumpograms of grannies and all these kind of things. A very difficult modality to standardize. It is cited as a top priority by radiologists and imaging departments, but I think we need to see that prospective evidence. We need to see a very high negative predictive value of these algorithms before I think they'll be seen in commercial use. Some of these companies are potentially saying in the future, it might be possible to take a work list of chest x-rays and actually remove 10, 20, 30% of these x-rays from the work list and say these are definitely normal, but the negative predictive value would have to be incredibly high. Most of these can provide some kind of output in a report, either in a PDF template or direct into your RIS, which will save you time. They help with timely communications directly with the referring clinicians. We know that most chest x-rays are not reported in a timely fashion for the emergency department or the ward patients. We often have a backlog, especially in the UK. So I think these systems will add value to not just the radiologists, but the referring clinicians who might just want to report on a chest x-ray straight away and don't want to bother a busy radiologist. They're meant to be user-friendly, and of course you can plug these into your kind of standardized reporting. BrainMR. Now this is by far the most common offering for AI startups across Europe. I found 12. The one that was most well known to me before was Icometrics from Belgium and Kubin from Spain, but there are obviously all of these others. You'll notice I'm not making a judgment on who's better or who's worse. I haven't tried all of these systems out. I'm just stating that these are all in the market in competition with each other. Now, quantitation of analytics was cited in the Euro AIM study as a sort of major focus or an application that was desired by radiologists. So if you are a neuroimaging professional, then you will presumably want to be looking at one of these. And depending on whether you want to look at neurodegenerative disorders, such as dementia, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, or if you're more acute and you want to do stroke, infarct, volumetric assessments, hemorrhage, or even oncology, so tumor delineation, tumor size, tumor necrosis, and all these kind of things. All of these things can now be quantified, again, in a visual format or in a PDF report or put out verbally into your RIS in a structured format. Now, I was never a neuroradiologist, so I have limited knowledge of exactly how useful this is on a day-to-day basis for the jobbing radiologist, but this is certainly useful in a pharmacology trial situation where new drugs which are being designed to treat any of these neurodegenerative disorders or brain cancers. If you're doing MRIs every 3 months or so to follow up, I think this kind of information will be very valuable to big pharma companies. So I'm aware that several of these AI companies are partnering with these companies to help them in their pharma trials. So again, you can provide a standardized report, provide detailed quantitative analytics, and then it to be user-friendly. This does sort of bring us into a new paradigm of radiology. Essentially, before, neuroradiologists could never hope to delineate every single aspect of these lesions and these flare hyperintensities, nor quantify them. So this actually brings us into a whole new paradigm of neuroimaging, which I think the neuroimaging radiologists are going to find very exciting. They will be in charge of a cockpit of tools producing all these figures and numbers, and it's up to them to drive that forward and provide the appropriate use cases and adjunctive research to it. Top tip, if you are thinking of developing or starting a new startup, I probably wouldn't focus on this area. This is the most saturated part of the market. Moving on, plain film musculoskeletal films. Again, it's large volume, relatively boring imaging modality, but very large volume. It is diagnostic to a degree. We are moving towards more low-dose CT for ill-defined fractures or even quick MR, but there are 3 companies focusing on fracture detection or quantification of grading and measurement of angles of hips and knees and osteoarthritis and things like that. I think, there is a large volume of this kind of imaging, and again, radiologists tend not to report these straight away. So there is a time element here, especially if you're an emergency doctor and you want to know that is there a fracture, can I discharge this patient? You want to report pretty much straight away. You don't want to wait 3 days for your report. So having this kind of system in an A&E department might be very beneficial. But I think more practically, orthopedic fracture clinics may be using these because they get overbooked. And they want to reduce their caseload, and if an AI system can say with a high negative predictive value there's no fracture, then that patient may not necessarily need to come to fracture clinic. And the other thing is audit and quality assurance of radiologists. Increasingly in the UK, we have professional radiographers who are reporting this workload, and I think an AI system supporting them in their work will be a very useful adjunct as well. I know that radiographer reporting is controversial, to say the least, in other parts of Europe. In the UK, we are using it quite heavily in this modality. So I do expect to see radiographer AI-supported workflows in the future. And again, we can use this for quality and audit, time saving, and timely communications of results. Moving on to ultrasound. Now, you'll remember from the AI Med survey, the radiologists didn't really want much AI in their ultrasound. Why is that? Well, we don't do echocardiography as radiologists, or at least we don't in the UK. That's up to the cardiologists, and they love AI in their ultrasound. So there's several companies who are focusing on cardiac motion, flow, and all this kind of quantitative analytics that you can do on ultrasound. The other thing is that radiologists don't do POCUS, point of care ultrasound. This is, those new devices that plug into your smartphone where anybody with an ultrasound probe can now scan anybody with an ultrasound. Now, we as radiologists shudder with dread when we think about non-qualified people doing ultrasound, but there are signs that AI can help non-experts or trainees localize what they're looking at by using AI to say, move up a bit, move down a bit. That's the quadrant 7 of the liver, or whatever it is that they're looking at. So AI in ultrasound is another focus, but it's not really focused on us, the radiologists. And then there's this company in the UK, Think Sono, who are doing deep vein thrombosis detection. So trying to automate that. So no longer will our radiology list be filled up with query DVT requests. That can be done by someone trained using their system. Again, these are designed to be very user-friendly. They can be used for quality and audit, quality control and audit, and they are meant to be time savers as well. So now moving on to sort of the end, the last 2 phases of the radiology workflow. So decision support. This was what you'll remember I put a purple dot above. This is the reasoning and inference part of the workflow. And the only startup really helping in this area is one called ContextFlow out of Austria. And what they do is, in essence, image lookup. So as a radiologist, you can draw a region of interest on whatever scan you're looking at, and their software will search not only Radiopedia, your Rouse and Radiology Assistant for similar things and give you tips, but also it can go through your entire PACS system and find similar cases, and then you can review the reports of what your colleagues have said for similar things. So this helps in your diagnostic reasoning and decision making, and is a useful lookup tool, hopefully within your PACS system in your workflow. So again, a time saver, user friendly, and can help with quality control. I quite like this as an idea, and they are the only company in this space that I'm aware of. As a startup, there may be some big OEM vendors doing similar, but I'm just talking about startups. And then finally, structured reporting. Again, only one company in Europe doing this, and they're Smart Reporting out of Germany. They offer a smart radiology platform. They also have smart pathology for pathologists. In essence, they can codify the report at source. So at the moment, their version 1 is a templated out report, and these are all done to standardized guidelines. So there will be guidelines there for PIRADS if you're a prostate radiologist, or LIRADS if you're a lung radiologist, with a tick box exercise. All the report text is populated as you tick boxes in a standardized way, and the background information can be displayed. So if you're not very good at doing PIRADS reports, all the information is there, just a click away, and then provides analytics. The benefits of structured reporting, I'm a massive fan of structured reporting. I use it a lot in my research. But the benefits aren't just, codifying data for research purposes. This is really the crux of how AI systems are going to interact with the radiology department, in that we create machine readable data, which is then suitable for further AI training and analytics and future research. And the other thing to remember is that all the other AI products that we've been talking about also can produce codified data that can plug into a structured report. And if put into a platform or something equivalent to this, that can be put out as free human text that is understandable by the lay reader. So you have a quantitative neuro MI algorithm plugging into this. It can fill the spaces relevant and will check the relevant tick boxes, and then a free text report is generated, but the data underlying it is maintained. Some nice little add-ons are that you can just click once and get an entire normal report. So that's a big time-saving thing. And then I think very pertinent to the EU market is that there's potential for one-click language translation. So you could report in German and your free text report comes out in French or Spanish or whatever you want it to do. So that's not necessarily possible with standard existing translation tools. And for those of you worried about, oh, I don't want to go by someone else's template, you can make your own templates as well. So yeah, user-friendly, timely communications, and structured reporting. And let's just briefly mention the app stores. These are multiple algorithms in sort of one place. There are sort of 3 variations on this theme across Europe. From Scotland, we have Blackford Analysis. They have an AI platform which contains a curated marketplace of 13 products, and they have an AI dashboard which is designed to help you control your workflows and have a look and manage how everything's going. Incepto is from France. They have 8 products in their app marketplace, and Radpoint, I believe, is from Poland. I'll check the map when we next get to it. And they're part of a bigger company, and they have an entire workflow suite from scheduling all the way to booking and all this kind of stuff. And now they're adding in integrating AI products, and I think they have 6 products as advertised on their website now. So if you are a hospital looking to buy algorithms, then the marketplace is maybe one way to do it. I think it's important to point out a caveat in that with the marketplaces, you don't necessarily have direct to vendor communications. So there may be teething problems, or there may be issues with feeding back to algorithms. But by all means, check these marketplaces out. I think we'll also see some competition from the OEM vendors. I would imagine most of the PACS vendors will be building their own marketplaces too. So again, these guys will either have to work and play nicely with them or consider an acquisition model with them. So we're going to go to the regulatory infrastructure next, but I think we'll pause there as I think we have several questions coming in.
Yeah, so I mean, basically there have been a couple more startups been suggested through the chat, and I think we'll just send you the transcripts afterwards, so yeah, you may have a look. And then there was like one question, if there is, or if you are aware of any AI tools for especially dense breasts, I guess mammography and maybe MRI even, I don't know.
So one of the startups, if I just go back, hang on. One of the startups was focusing on this sort of post-processing imaging quality, and they did offer post-processing imaging quality for mammo. If they're talking about the breast screening ones for dense breasts, then there's Chiron, ScreenPoint, and Vara, I think it is, all offer mammo screening AI solutions, and you'd have to ask them how well they do with dense breasts individually.
And then there's just one other question, but I mean, we can probably save those for later. This one was about if there's any AI tool for lung emphysema and fibrosis. Maybe just a quick answer there if you are aware of any, and then I think we'll keep all the other questions regarding broader topics to the end.
Yeah, so I can't remember off by heart who is doing lung fibrosis and emphysema. I think Kibim have a tool for this, and there are a couple of more startups out there. I think what I'll do is I'll take into account the comments and the suggestions from the attendees, and I'll fill out the map with anything that we've missed.
Yeah, right.
And maybe we'll publish through Yosomi a list of all the startups. Maybe.
Yeah, right, okay.
Because there's quite a lot, and I don't think anyone knows every single one.
That's right, yes, certainly.
Yeah, good. I can see that people are mentioning a lot more startups in the chat. Not necessarily
That's right.
all from Europe, guys. We need to keep them focused on the European market.
That's right.
Okay, so I've got sort of 5 minutes or left or so, so I'm going to briefly just go over the regulatory infrastructure. Everything that I've spoken about so far is qualified as a medical device, and therefore you need to get the CE mark to put your thing on market. So how does CE marking work? Well, the European Commission comes up with the European Medical Device Directives. Each country will have a national governing body. In the UK, ours is called the MHRA. Your own country will have your own governing body. I haven't listed them all here, but you will have one. They allow for-profit notified bodies. These are bodies who are allowed to come in and audit and notify and provide CE marking to startups, and they are paid for by the vendors who go, we want to have our CE marking. So the vendors build an algorithm, they pay the notified body to come in and audit all of their documentation. The notified body say, yes, you can have the CE mark. They notify the national governance frameworks and say, this person's got the CE mark, and it's all overseen by the European medical device regulations. These are being updated on the 26th of May this year. So some of these companies have class 1 designation. They are going to have to upgrade to class 2, not by the 26th of May. There is an extension for a few years if you're a class 1 device, but any new companies will at least be a class 2 device. Class 2 means it's higher risk, mostly if you're doing computer vision tasks and going to be involved in any form of the diagnostic workflow, then you'll be a class 2 device. There's also going to be a new central database called UDAMED, which is going to be a comprehensive database of all of these startups. So people like me won't have to search online for every single company who's got an AI CE cleared device. There will be a database for it. So you will be able to search on that. It was meant to be introduced in May this year, but there's been delays, and I think it's going to be 2, maybe 3 years before that database comes online. But you will be able to check product registration and all this kind of stuff. And I hope they're going to be able to put in feedback loops as well. So you'll be able to check if people have had issues or complaints as well that have been upheld against medical device manufacturers. If you're an academic and you're watching this and going, I don't need to get CE mark, you're right, but you still need to go through the regulations. Vendors, OEM players have to get a quality management system, but so do academics and hospitals. And this needs to be in keeping with the International Standards Organization quality management system regulations, which are known as 13485. I don't know who designs these numbers. They just randomly allocate 5 numbers, but 13485 is what you want. If you want to place it on market, you then need to do the added step of getting a CE mark. If you want to use it in your hospital on your patients, you need to apply to put it into use, and you need to have an ISO 13485 standard. You may also need ISO 27001 for data security standards. So if you're an academic or hospital, you are not exempt from regulation after May 26th this year. So be prepared. There's a lot of discussion in how do we validate these algorithms. And several people have proposed a 4-phase kind of slant on this, from feasibility all the way through to post-market surveillance. This was a take that I've designed with some professors from Stanford. This is a paper that we've submitted. It's still in review. It's been in review for 2.5 months. I need to chase it up. But essentially, phase 1 is a feasibility study. You get a small piece of data. Does the algorithm work on a simple task? And if it does, you may want to publish those results. Phase 2, you actually build your algorithm, and this is part of your regulatory documentation, is you perform it in a controlled environment, simulating real-world conditions. That'll be a phase 2 study. And then you deploy it locally, and you do a sort of clinical evaluation, and that's sort of a prospective study. And then a phase 4, once it's on market, you need to do your post-market surveillance and follow up and make sure that it's actually working in the real world and not drifting away from the reported accuracy at the point of deployment. Another thing that came up in the Euro AIM survey was, who is legally responsible for an AI system should it do something wrong? And this was the opinions of the radiologists who responded to the survey. And as you can see, they're relatively split between the radiologist is entirely responsible, and there should be shared responsibility between the radiologist and the AI vendors. The legal answer is, if the AI is not producing the final decision, as the vast majority of these aren't, then it is actually the radiologist who is still legally responsible. We are now responsible for the outputs of the AI systems, or we're responsible to check that they make sense, and we're responsible for including or excluding them for our reports when we send them on to our clinical referrers or our patients. It is not a shared responsibility system unless we can somehow demonstrate that these devices have been dangerously negligent in some way outside of their intended use as per their CE mark. So I predict in the next couple of years, most likely in America first, there's going to be some kind of litigation or lawsuit over some AI that's gone slightly awry. So this will come out in the wash. But my understanding from the legal framework at present is that it is actually radiologists who are entirely responsible if they choose to use AI systems. So what are the key market trends? So the startup market is kind of saturating. Most of the possible things that we could think of using AI for are being developed, apart from, as I said before, oncology staging. The regulatory approvals are increasing, which indicates that there's we are now market ready for these things. And I presume, given the interest in this talk alone, most of you are really considering or are currently using some kind of AI in a deployment or pilot study at least. There are 3 routes to market. You can go via the OEM vendors, because they're embedding AI into as much as their hardware as they can. Their business model is sell hardware. So of course they're going to put AI in it to try and sell more hardware. There are app stores or platforms which partner with the AI vendors. So there are 3 European ones you can go with. Or you can form direct sales channels with hospitals. Now, this is the more challenging one for startups, but it's certainly one of the things that they have to kind of go through. And direct sales channels to hospitals are notoriously difficult. So startups doing this often struggle at this stage. One thing to note is that commercial adoption is lagging because of a lack of prospective evidence. I think Europe benefits over, say, America by the fact that we will not tend to adopt new technologies unless there's some kind of evidence base for it. And you can look at the original breast CAD from 2 decades ago. America used it in 95% of their mammo readings. Europe really didn't take it on at all because the evidence wasn't there to support improved outcomes. And I think the same will be with AI essentially as well. So while we're market ready, it doesn't necessarily mean that commercial adoption is going to happen. So the prospective evidence is crucial, and I expect many more prospective studies to appear this year into next year. So what are my predictions? I think the AI bubble will pop. Some might say it kind of has popped. There are rumors of layoffs at some of the larger companies. Some CEO and founders are moving on, and VC funding is definitely drying up. We're starting to see a downtick in the amount of funding going towards AI and radiology companies. So it's going to come down to who can get the best traction and can we predict the winners? It's very difficult at this stage. There's a little bit of a war between how you deploy AI. Are you going to put it in a scanner, in some hardware, or is it going to be in the cloud? Obviously, the big players want to push it into the hardware, but all the PACS and risk people want to put it into the cloud. Either way, interoperability is the new word. You'll hear a lot about that at congresses. So the questions to be answered really is, where is AI best deployed? And I guess, what is the future for teleradiology as well? In the UK, we outsource a lot of imaging. So if they start using AI systems, is that a good model for deploying AI? My gut instinct is that it is. And I know that for sure that some of the teleradiology providers are pushing hard into this space. I can't envisage any new clinical applications for perceptive AI. I think that market is pretty saturated unless someone figures out a way to be able to analyze the bowel on the CT. I don't think that we're going to find any more perceptive use cases being addressed. Certainly nothing clever. But the success of each of these applications really will depend on the radiologist demand and where the biggest return on investment is. And that will depend on who's doing it right and who gets the best prospective evidence. So I think this is my last slide. What are the challenges? So there are market gaps in the early and late radiology flows. The image perception part is kind of saturated, but if you want to get into scheduling and booking and decision to image processes, or indeed communication of results and patient translation of reports and things like that, then there's market space there. As I said, the VC funding is drying up yet. No one's really proved a significant return on investment yet. prospective studies are incoming. I think this is an incredibly exciting time for AI in radiology. This is the make or break. We'll find out over the next 3-4 years whether all of this hype has been worth it. The EU market is very large and it's attractive to global players, but we are more evidence-based. So what I mean by this is that I've mentioned 44 startups in Europe. I know there are more. Thanks for mentioning those in the comments. But we've got to watch out because there are all the other global players trying to get into the EU market as well. So we're not just competing against each other in Europe, we're competing against a global space. But we have the advantage because we're from Europe, we're going to hopefully get that evidence base earlier than the global competitors, and that will get market traction earlier. And number 5, if you're Spanish and you want to start a new company, don't choose a name starting with Q. The reason I say that is all the Spanish ones start with Q. So there's my last top tip. I think that's my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hugh. The last sentence was pretty funny, and it is true. But yes, this is excellent talk, and thank you for this great overview and this great ideas. I agree fully with you. I mean, for me, the 2 most important factors in determining the future are the return on investment, and this is something that you have to examine for each institution or hospital where you want to implement AI. What's the return on investment? And it's always difficult to express this in pure financial value. I mean, there should be other values attached as well. But exactly what you say is right. The prospective evidence is still lacking, and this is kind of crucial, and this is what we're waiting for. But on the other hand, when you are looking for an AI application, it's not easy to select one nowadays. There's a lot of them, and of course you have to, sometimes there's similar applications for the same purpose, for the same goal, and then you should wonder yourself, how can I evaluate? So everybody has to find out themselves how to do it, what are the criteria, how should I select one, and maybe this is applicable for this lecture, I think. You're not now talking about European startups, and what do you think? Is it relevant to stick to European vendors because it might be relevant for the data they have been using to train the algorithms, because the local data, let's say maybe European data, might be different from the Chinese data, for example, or data coming from elsewhere. So how relevant is this, do you think?
I think it is quite relevant, and interestingly, during the regulatory CE marking approval process, you have to demonstrate that your intended population is defined, and that any studies that you do to support your CE marking application have to be performed on a relevant population. Now, predominantly, the European population is white Caucasian, but we are a multicultural society, and so we have to kind of prove that we work on all. There are very few populations where the internal anatomy of the human body does look different in almost all cases. The only one I can think of off the top of my head is female Chinese breasts tend to be smaller and denser than European Caucasian people. So in that situation, you would definitely have to do a study onto the different populations. But
yes, of course. But as soon as you start working with biomarkers or with lungs, etc., it might be kind of different with the kind of pathologies that you're detecting or analyzing.
Exactly, and I think we don't really know the answer to that yet. And I think that would be interesting to see if AI can detect or get fooled by different patterns that maybe European radiologists aren't aware of in this underlying pixel level data.
At least it should be transparent what kind of data the startups have used to train the algorithm. I mean, there should be complete transparency towards the users, I think. Yeah. But yeah, as far as that is concerned, that's kind of difficult to get more information about it.
So again, for your CE marking process, you have to do a clinical investigation, but you don't necessarily have to publish the results. Mm-hmm. I actually think you probably should. But the European Commission has been lobbied by the industry not to mandate that unless you are a class 3 device, which is very high risk.
Yeah. So, last question for you, Hugh. So I've read the study recently where you can clearly see that the research or the amount of publications mainly comes from the United States and then followed by China. And then you see several European countries. Of course, all these countries, when you look at them separately, they cannot compete with China or the US. But what's your idea? If you would, let's say, add all these separate European initiatives throughout the European Union, do you think that we are quite close to United States, or is there still a significant gap?
I would say it's quality over quantity.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's been a rush in China and America to produce a lot of papers, and I'm not saying they're all of low quality. There's certainly some very good ones, but I think they're incentivized more to publish these very early stage experimental studies. And I think the quality of the European studies, once these prospective ones come out, will surpass those of ones that we see in America, for two reasons. One, we are capable of doing multinational studies very easily, whereas in America, they tend not to be able to do those so much, same in China. And two, we have a very strong lean towards clinical trials and prospective studies here in Europe across multiple sites and jurisdictions. And again, in America, with their siloed for-profit private healthcare system, they tend to just do local geographic studies. So I think the quality of the studies when they come out of Europe will should surpass those of Asia and America.
Yeah. Okay, Daniel, I think we still have a bit of time for
questions. I think we'll just take a couple more minutes to get some of the questions answered that were now posted to the Q&A. So maybe quick answers if possible, because we don't take too much time now. But so one of the questions from the Q&A box was, can startups send their data outside of the EU for annotation purposes? Is there any regulatory?
Yeah, well, so this comes under GDPR, which is, I always get the acronym wrong, General Data Protection Regulations or something to that effect. So, and this covers the whole of Europe. So in answer, no, you can't send identifiable patient data outside of EU for annotation. Can you send de-identified data out? Well, it depends on the level of your de-identification and where you're sending it to, is my experience. I'm not going to get off the fence because I don't want to get in trouble legally, but I think it is possible, though I think you would have to consult with a GDPR lawyer.
Right. Yeah. So another question here, and maybe that's a bit of a follow-up to some things that you already discussed, but should hospitals start creating local test sets in preparation of like validating different AI products? Should that be on a local basis or more on a national basis? What's your take there?
I would absolutely. If you can develop a local, so let's say that you know that you're going to look at a chest X-ray algorithm. There is no reason why you shouldn't set up a chest X-ray database, and you should put in there a range of chest X-rays. Don't just try and trick the system. Just put in, a normal kind of volume and a normal range of what you might see in a clinical practice, and get your radiologist to agree and ground truth it, and then you can assess algorithms very quickly. This is also a nice way to get quick studies published as well.
Right. Yeah. One question that's been coming up in the chat and the Q&A quite frequently is, like, what's your idea, or how does AI kind of tools fit into the whole discussion about value-based healthcare? I mean, everybody's talking about, oh, AI is going to liberate us from tedious tasks and we're going to spend more time with the patient. So, but what's your idea on that?
So, yeah, I mean, lots of people have said that AI is going to sort of free up our time and make us more patient-facing. I think that it's going to be a while before we get to that stage. At the moment, it's not meaningfully replacing much of what we do as radiologists. It's an adjunct, and it's certainly in the early deployment phases, we're going to have to be looking at extra information, which actually might slow us down in some cases.
Right.
But I think, as a lot of these narrow AI programs start to work together and come together, hopefully we can output these into some format of structured reporting, so it all comes together, then yes, then potentially we will be able to speed up. The other thing to remember is that any time that a radiologist has free, someone will come and ask us a question or look at a report.
Right.
I've never seen a time where a radiologist has gone, oh, I finished the list, there's nothing to do.
That's right. That's right. So two questions that are probably kind of close to each other and that are more again towards the regulatory aspect. So one question is, like, in terms of algorithmal vigilance, let's say, should these tools be rebranded as CE each year? And the other question is a bit before the vigilance part is it necessary to provide clinical studies with like defined outcomes or even prospective studies to get CE marking?
So to answer the second question first, you need to do a retrospective study to prove that your algorithm does what it says on the tin on a defined sort of cohort of population. That's what you need to do to get CE marking. You don't need to do a prospective study to get CE marking. Prospective studies are left for the post-market surveillance phase. The reason for that is not to slow down innovation. If you mandated that all these 44 startups had to do a prospective study, you'd kill the vast majority of them before they could get market traction. So it's a purposeful balance between innovation and market traction. That said, there now needs to be a stronger lean on what I call techno-vigilance, or as the question asked, algorithmo-vigilance. And should products be re-CE marked every year? In essence, the new regulations coming out in May say that they should. You have to submit what's known as a periodic safety update report every year to your notified body. And this includes what you did in your post-market clinical follow-up plan. So you need to include data from your clients on how accurate you've been, report any adverse events or technical issues, and any prospective studies that you've done. So yes, you do have to do it. Whether you have to publish that widely or not, I don't think you do under the regulatory guidelines. That obviously it's best practice from an academic point of view.
And so maybe the last question now. So there are all these narrow AI tools that do some particular task, and of course there's no way to get like sort of general AI in the near future. So one question here was like, why wouldn't all these startups that perform each a single task combine their algorithms and powers so that you have like a more, let's say, holistic tool at your hand that does everything at once? Somehow, is there like, would that make sense at all? Is there any initiatives towards that, or?
Yeah, so this is sort of what's known as orchestration of algorithms. So you input a CT scan and you want the chest algorithm to look at this, and you want the spine algorithm to look at that, and the liver algorithm to look at something else. And the question being asked is quite right. I mean, it seems silly that you would send that CT to 3 different companies and they'll come out with 3 different answers. So there needs to be some orchestration of algorithms. So the bigger players are focusing on this to try and get all of the algorithms working in an orchestra together. Do you have a woodwind section and a string section, etc.? And I also know that the company I mentioned, Smart Reporting, are also working on this as well, because they want all of the outputs from these algorithms to go into a structured report. So it needs to be orchestrated in a certain way. So that question is very pertinent, and I think we will need to see industry-wide standards of how these things interoperate with each other.
Luke, I have a last question for you to finalize. So maybe, well, this is a good question, by the way, so maybe everybody should collaborate, but what do you think about a concept that radiologists start developing their algorithms themselves? I mean, the algorithms exist, but the data are locally. So if radiologists would be offered, or if a platform would be available that guides them through all steps from A to Z to prepare the data, to train the algorithm, to validate it, to test, etc., and then to implement it, maybe that would be the easiest way to go. So just try to find out what is the best use case, get yourself a good platform and create it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of people have said this to me, and I have 2 things to say. Number one, have you ever labeled more than 100 cases?
Oh, that can be optimized.
Yeah. Okay. The second thing is, have you ever gone through the regulatory frameworks? Yeah. Because yes, you can build your own algorithms, that's fine. But if you want to use them on patients, you need to go through some of this regulatory documentation. And that costs money and it takes time, and it's significant. Someone has to maintain that. And then once you're using it, you have to do all the post-market follow-up and all this reporting. So this is why industry exists, is they fund all of that documentation, paperwork, and annotation, and they do it. So by all means, academic radiologists can build their own AI and publish papers, but I see very few of those use cases being made into products that people are actually illegally allowed to use on patients in a clinical setting. So I think any system that was designed to help radiologists build their own AI would have to include annotation, but also the regulatory pathways as well.
Yes, of course, and you need money and time to do it.
Exactly, and that startups get that from investors. So yeah.
All right, this was great. We had a lot of attendees, so and the topic was very interesting. So thanks again, Hugh, for your willingness to give this interesting lecture. And of course, we hope that the ECR will continue. So maybe we can meet each other again in Vienna. And of course, all the attendees are welcome in our booth, our Usomi booth. So Paola will welcome them. And yes, of course, we would like to see them. So thanks again and have a nice evening, everybody.
Thank you very much. I hope to be at ECR too. I'll be moderating the AIX Theatre if the conference is going ahead.
Yeah. Okay. I'll definitely be there if you are coming too. All right.
Thank you.
And just to mention that, so we would like to thank, of course, Bracco for sponsoring our webinar.
Of course. Thank you.
All right. See you.